Hi everyone. I think I went off for a bit. I yeah, but I hope everything is fine now because I had noticed a problem on the screen. Can those who have tuned in just comment stating if I'm audible or not? So if you can hear me, just comment with a text with a comment, yeah, saying you can hear me basically. Oh, okay, great. Okay, we're just gonna wait for about 2 more minutes. Because we're supposed to start at 6. So just to let everyone come in, and then we'll start exactly at 6 o'clock. Okay, it's 6 o'clock on my watch. Let's get started. I'd like to greet everyone who is watching in the wonderful name of my Lord and personal Savior, Jesus Christ. Good evening. Before we get started, can we just quickly pray? Because I noticed that it's the tradition here on this page that we pray before we start. So let us have a short prayer. Lord, you're great. Lord, you're worthy to be praised. Kubo bonke ooThixo simakade. Akekho ofana nawe. Thixo mhlodume ngokulunga ngoba iingceba zakho inene zimizi ngunaphakade nangoku ndiyanqena into yokubana zimizi ngunaphakade. Thixo mhlodume ngokulunga. As we are about to start this session, Malusolongleyo, may your Holy Spirit, Thixo mhlodume ngokulunga, take over Malusolongleyo. May your Holy Spirit, Malusolongleyo, consume me, Malusolongleyo. May it speak through me, Thixo mhlodume ngokulunga. May this conversation become a conversation. May it be a fruitful one, Thixo mhlodume ngokulunga. And may it mend broken bridges, Malusolongleyo, because we know that within young people, especially around this organization, there are broken bridges in some synods and regions due to misunderstandings of us not finding each other. So may this conversation mend those bridges kungathi ungakhokhela ngaphambili Thixo mhlothe ngokulunga. Ndicela ke ndisazi into yobana sowenzile. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Let's get started. For those who do not know me, my name is Hlonelikhaya Klaas. I am from Makanda, formerly known as Grahamstown. I am from the Grahamstown Synod in the Grahamstown Circuit, 201. I am a psychology student at the Nelson Mandela University, and I am the current connectional president of the Methodist Student Society. And so that is why, that's why I was invited to come and speak on this topic that says getting to know MethSSoc. Now, as we're getting started, I'd like to start with a short story. When I was in Matric a few years ago, we had a winter school, a district winter school. Now, district as per government and not the church. So basically according to the boundaries of government. So we had a district a district camp. It was a winter school where all the schools in our district would converge in one space and stay there in that camp. And in that particular year, the camp was in a military base. So it was in a military base. We would go there, we'd attend lectures, not lectures, classes, and then we'd go to our dorms and sleep and have sport and all of that. And we were supposed to stay there for a couple of weeks. So, and this was to prepare for our final exams and our trial exams. Now, we stayed there, everything was great, and a weird thing happened on the Sunday. During the weekdays, every evening, some of us would just sit together and would have a devotion and then continue with whatever that we're doing, either sleeping or chilling with everyone else. And it would normally be about 5 or 6 of us. That would be the numbers, maybe 7 max, but it would just be those individuals. And what happened on the Sunday, so basically it was just these few people, but a weird thing happened on the Sunday. On the Sunday, the first Sunday there, a weird thing happened where everyone was chilling, we had nothing to do, and even the people that did not join us for our devotions, they started saying, it feels weird not going to church on a Sunday. I wish I was at church. And it's such a pity that this military base is on the side in Makanda. It's on the periphery. So it would be difficult to go to a church service. And it seemed to be a common frustration amongst the learners there. Surprisingly, even the ones that didn't join us for the devotions. So on the Monday, I decided to approach myself and another guy that everyone called Umfundis, because he was always keen to conduct to lead the devotions that we'd have in our small group. So they then, on the Monday, myself and him, we went to the person that was heading that entire program. And we asked if it was possible to actually get a venue where we can worship every Sunday. And he organized this. He spoke to the people that are in charge of the military base, and we got a venue. They agreed that every Sunday morning, we gave them a time. Every Sunday morning, they would open the venue for us, and we'd go in there and worship. So we went there. The second Sunday came. We went there, and myself and this guy that everyone called Umfundisi, we led the service. Now, he came from a Pentecostal background, a Pentecostal church, and myself, Methodist church. So we had decided that we need to sit down and find a way of conducting our service. And so we agreed that I would lead the first part, which would be the worship and a bit of liturgy, but not in the traditional way that we normally do it in a Methodist society. And then from there, he would come in with the word, and then I'd come in as a second preacher, and then we share and open it up to everyone who wants to contribute and reflect on the word. So we did that. All was great. And what I want to point out there is that we had converged in that space to prepare for our exams. We had converged in that space to learn. That was the sole purpose of that event. However, a need came up where these people, as much as they'd come here for one thing, they started having a hunger and a thirst for spiritual fulfillment, or for something that would feed their spirituality, which is the church. They needed a church. So in this military base that was for learning and just there to learn, a church was formed out of this need. A similar thing happened in 1730 in Oxford University after the ordination of John Wesley, where he came back to university and found his brother Charles Wesley and some of his friends there, where they had a club, and they called it the Holy Club. And the purpose of the club was to keep each other motivated with their academics. And that was the sole purpose of it, to keep each other accountable and to work with each other for their academics. John Wesley got in there and he emerged as the leader of the group and led it. And slowly the group started changing. And John Wesley brought in some guidelines and added things that they would do. So from it now being an academic space just for learning, it started transforming, and now it added spirituality or religious practices into it. So now it became 1 minute they're studying, they're keeping each other accountable, and then now they moved on to keeping each other accountable with their spiritual journey, observing some of the religious practices in that space. And then it grew and started moving more, and they added Bible studies, and then from Bible studies they had communion, where they had Holy Communion. From there it was prayers, and then from there it moved on to mission work, where they started visiting the sick, started visiting those who were poor and assisting them, going to those who were illiterate and assisting them in learning, visiting prisons. And so from there, students then said, and we know the story, students then said, some of the students that were observing all of this, seeing how they had a method to everything that they were doing, they started naming them Methodists. And that was the birth of the Methodist Church of Southern Africa. Or not Southern Africa, of the Methodist Church as a whole. The movement of the Methodist Church started there. Now, if I was given 10 minutes for this session, that right there would be my explanation as to what MethSoc is. That right there is what MethSoc is, but just in a South African context. So with MethSoc, now, because I have more than 10 minutes, then let's start unpacking MethSoc. MethSoc started in the same way as the Methodist Church. That's why I say that it is, that's what MethSoc is, with that example that I gave. MethSoc started in the exact same way. MethSoc started with a group of students who went to university to study and excel in the academics and all of that. However, when they got into that space, they realized that there were a lot of churches around that were there in the university space. However, these churches were not feeding, or they were not speaking to their spirituality and what they know. And the doctrines and the teachings of these churches were not speaking to what they know from back at home. And so they started forming groups where they started meeting and having meetings where basically, just like John Wesley and his brother and the rest of their friends, they started meeting, they started fellowshipping with each other. And some of them, because now they got a good foundation in their circuits back at home where they were Wesley Guild members, they started basically calling themselves Wesley Guild within that university space. And so they started using the 4 C's for Christ as their methods, or as a guiding framework for some of them. Some of them didn't call themselves Wesley Guild. They didn't give themselves any name. They just gathered as young Methodists and they started worshiping together. And this continued with time. And then in 1996, that's when now this whole thing started being more formal. In 1996, then Medunsa MethSoc visited UWC, and they visited MethSoc there because they had then become more aware that there are other students that are also Methodists that are meeting. And so they started meeting them. They visited them in 1996. And when they got there, they also invited Cape Tech. They'd also invited Pentech as well. And when they got there, they had conversations. And out of that meeting, they then agreed that we need to try and have a national structure that would coordinate our work. They decided that they need to meet and they need to have some form of a structure that would coordinate their work. And so they decided that, okay, we'll have the structure. And the reasons for this is because we are realizing that there are common troubles that we have, or challenges, where questions of pledging, as to where do we pledge now that we're in this space and we've formed these groups and we're worshiping together. What happens with our pledges? I started asking themselves, where do we account? If we were to die, what would happen with our students? Because now if a student dies, they're no longer active in their home circuit. They're no longer present in their home circuit. So who accounts for them? What happens with them? They started having those conversations. They also started having conversations around how can we get a minister or someone who would also help us, right, in this spiritual formation, in us forming, and who would guide us. And they also then had conversations around constitution, because remember that they were not really what's this thing? They were not really formal within the universities, right? And so then they just had the conversation as to we need to also start looking at constitution, because the thing about university is that in order to form an organization in an institution of high learning, you need to have a constitution. So they started having those conversations, and then they had decided that they would then meet the following year, which is 1997. They met, and when they got there, they realized that they visited Medunsa this time. And when they got there, they realized that it's still the same people, it's still the same universities. So let us rather appoint a steering committee. This committee would reach out, so a national steering committee. And this committee would reach out to the other universities that are moving, and would basically try and move this conversation of MethSoc within the universities. And then they dispersed, and then the following year, then they met again in Bloem. They met there and had their first conference. They had their first conference in Bloem in 1998. However, they did not elect there. They continued with their steering committee, and they only started electing on their second conference, which was then, and it was a national conference. Their second conference in 1999, where they met in Gauteng, and they decided then that they would elect their first committee, a national committee. So basically from its inception, MethSoc had a national committee. From there, they met again in 2000. And in year 2000, this is when they met, they had a conference in UWC. And this is when the then president of MethSoc, which was Motlatsi Kalabile, presented the idea of MethSoc. They met there, and then from there, they tasked their president to present MethSoc in the Connectional Conference. And it was in the Connectional Conference where then the coordinator, the then Connectional coordinator, was then appointed to start conversations with MethSoc and journey with MethSoc in trying to find ways of integrating MethSoc into the church. Because MethSoc started basically outside of the church. And so then they started having conversations of integration. And in 2002, they met again for a conference. And in that conference, they started realizing that the organization is growing, because then also the University of Swaziland had MethSoc. And so because of that, they then moved from having a national structure to saying now they have a connectional structure, because it's no longer just South Africa, but now it is the connection. In 2003, they moved on, and with the president and the coordinator, they then presented MethSoc at the Connectional Conference. They presented MethSoc, and MethSoc was then recognized as part, or as an organization within the church. And then from there, they started moving now. The vehicle started moving a bit faster. Now, with all of this, I mentioned a few universities, right? We're still in the process of actually finding out the story from other universities as to the exact years that they also started. Because as much as I mentioned these few, it's not just these few universities that had these formations or these groups of Methodists that were already worshiping together and moving in that space. Now, I want you to note, with that being said, so I'm saying that as much as my timeline starts in 1996, MethSoc existed before 1996. Or rather, let me say, let me rather put it this way. As much as my timeline starts in 1996, Methodists, young Methodists who were students, had started meeting and fellowshipping together before 1996. However, the conversation of the formalization of it started around 1996 moving forward. And we're still actually investigating this and trying to put this together. Myself and a few individuals are still working on this. Now, with that story being said, we've tracked the timeline in history. Who is MethSoc then? MethSoc has three types of members. It has three types of members. It is Methodists. So it is students who are Methodists. Or let me start this way. MethSoc, the first thing is it is registered students. Students that are registered in high institutions of learning. And with those students, they're broken into three. There's the first group, or with the membership, there's the first group, which are students that are confirmed in the Methodist Church, who are full members of the Methodist Church of Southern Africa. Those are the first members. The second members of MethSoc are students who are not confirmed in the Methodist Church. Now, these are students who grew up in the Methodist Church, and then when they got into university, they started joining MethSoc. And it's also students who come from different churches, who come from Pentecostal churches, who come from it's normally students who come from your Presbyterian church, your Anglicans, and other traditional churches, and some Pentecostal. So that's the second membership. They are full members of MethSoc. They're affiliated in MethSoc. They're registered with MethSoc. And then the third group, they're not students, but they were students. This is the group that we call alumni. So these are students, or rather these are individuals who were once MethSoc members and graduated. And after graduating, they then affiliated in MethSoc as alumni, and they form what MethSoc calls the convocation. So that's the third membership. These people are members of MethSoc. However, they exist more to form support as a support system for the Methodist Student Society. They're basically the big brothers and big sisters. They support, they mentor, and journey with MethSoc and provide any support that is required by those in university, and also mentor them. Now, basically with that being said, in MethSoc, we do not have fossils. So those people who normally say to our alumni that they need to rest, in MethSoc, we don't have rest. You graduate, you come back, and you give back to the organization as an alumni and as an alumnus. So now, some of the things then that happen is that now that you have these students, some of the conversation, or rather, let me start this way. So from there, with the membership being these three people, the second thing about MethSoc is that it has dual accountability. It has dual accountability where it accounts to the Methodist Church, at the same time it accounts to the university. So it is governed by the Methodist Church and its book of order. At the same time, it is governed by the policies of the university. Now, sometimes this causes a bit of tension and a bit of challenges, but I'll speak more about that later. So a student comes, they come from back home. Now, those who are full members, they come from home, they come with their visiting notes, they come into this new circuit or this MethSoc, and then MethSoc is linked to a circuit. MethSoc, that university that has MethSoc, is linked to a circuit. And in that circuit decides who is the minister that will have oversight on MethSoc. So the circuit appoints a minister who will have an oversight on MethSoc. And so then MethSoc is part of a circuit. As much as it's in a university, it becomes part of a circuit. Now, moving on from there, MethSoc, MethSoc's role, it is or what its role basically, or its purpose. It is to assist students in their spiritual formation and journey with them, while also providing them with necessary skills to develop them overall. So then MethSoc basically looks at the development of a student holistically. One side is the spirituality, and then on the other side, it's any skills that they feel the students would need in that space. So they then also provide academic support where they help them with growing, and excelling academically. Hence, then you'd hear MethSoc members saying, we pray together, we pass together. Now, moving from there, or rather, let me put this line. So basically, MethSoc is what the church is to society, but in the university context. So MethSoc is to the university what the church is to the broader community. Because universities are the microcosm of society, right? So that's what MethSoc is, basically. Now, let's move on a bit to the structures of MethSoc. With MethSoc, you find the society, which is the branch. And then from branch, you have your region. And then from region, you have your synod. And then you have a connectional structure. Now with synod, I'm mentioning synod. When I speak of synod, I'm speaking about MCYU, synod executive. So you move from branch to region, and then region accounts to synod MCYU executive, and then you have your connectional structure. Now in MethSoc, before you get to the connection, a deciding body after the branch is the region. The region sets its conferences and takes any decisions about their region and any things that are supposed to go before the connectional conference. And this happens annually. Now, that's also another part of a problem, or one of the things that gives challenges to MethSoc, but I'll speak about it also a bit later. Now, unlike the Wesley Guild, in the context of MethSoc, a region is a province. It's more of a province. Now with region, so basically you have your Eastern Cape region, you have your KZN region, you have your Free State, Gauteng, and KZN, and the Western Cape region. That's the region in MethSoc. So you have a structure in the region. Now, if you notice with that, if you look at Eastern Cape, for example, in Eastern Cape, you would find that you have more than one synod in one region. So that's why I said some of the challenges for MethSoc and some of the problems start there around its structures. But we'll speak about it a bit later. So you will find that a region has more than one synod within its boundaries. And remember, I had said that a regional structure accounts to an MCYU structure, synod executive. And then now again, I'm saying a region consists of more than one synod. So another example, using the Eastern Cape again, you'll find that the Eastern Cape region, inside the region, you have Grahamstown Synod, you have Queenstown Synod, and then you have Cleckbury. So you have all three within. And now there's the issues of the boundaries, new synods forming. So you can imagine what's going on there. Okay. Now let's move on to the challenges, as I've been mentioning them a lot. Let's start with the name. Methodist Students Society. The students is students, and then apostrophe. Okay? Society. The society there is not society in the traditional sense of the Methodist Church. It is the society because that's a term that is used for organizations in universities, especially religious organizations and academic societies, organizations. So we are calling ourselves the Methodist Student Society because we are an organization that is within a university. And so organizations and universities are societies. However, remember the example that I had made, or the story that I had made about myself in matric and then the birth of the Methodist Church? Because universities are generally, most of the time, are generally on the sides where they are excluded from society in a way, where they live in their own bubble away from society. Students had a need where they also need things like communion, right? And then from there, we also found that within these students, there are people who are Wesley Guild members. There are people who are YMG members. There are people who are Women's Manyano in this space. And in some universities, sometimes you'd also find people that are Young Women's Manyano and Women's Manyano. You'd have local preachers in this space. And I'm mentioning Women's Manyano because you need to remember that MethSsoc is for students. So every single person that is registered in a university can be a MethSsoc member. So even if they are 45 years of age or 55, they can be a MethSsoc member if they choose to affiliate to MethSsoc. And that's also one of the problems that we'll get to. So then, because MethSsoc members realize that we have all of these things, or all of these people in our organization, YMG members started wanting to have their YMG activities inside the space. Wesley Guild members started having Wesley Guild. Hence, you'll find in some universities, in some branches, where MethSsoc meets, let's say, on a Friday. Tuesday, Wesley Guild is meeting. So, because they were on the side, they started worshiping on Sundays. Because remember, they'd wanted what they got at home, but in this space. So they started fellowshipping on Sundays. This meant then that because they had a minister, the minister was appointed to them, started putting them on the roster for local preachers to also start taking preaching plans in university. So then this started creating now something that we know or that we're familiar with in the church, which is the traditional society. So we started finding this now, and this then started bringing some of the challenges for MethSsoc, where now the circuit would say, you behave like a society. You do everything that a society does. You have Holy Communion here as well. Then, if you are like that, start behaving like a society, because there are certain things that are expected from a society. And the name also didn't help, because it's Methodist Student Society. So immediately then, church members and the rest of the circuit draw a picture that this is a society. And some of the behavior was also saying this is a society. So now, now was starting to be expected. Pledges started being expected. All sorts, assessments, all sorts of commitments. And that was a problem because these are students. They're not working. A lot of them come from the middle class and poor backgrounds. So they did not have money for all of these things. And then conflicts started happening within the circuits. Okay? Because now you get benefits of being a society. However, you don't want to be a society. So that started then bringing about a lot of conflict. And then now, here's another thing then, moving from that. Now, they're behaving like a society. They are in the preaching plan. They go to CUM and everything. They like a society. At the same time, they are an organization. So they are now this thing, what Sianda Makubo likes calling this weird animal that is a hybrid. Where 1 minute it is 1 minute it is a society, the next minute it is an organization. But the way it is, this type of organization is an organization that has all the other organizations, which is YMG, because now when you go to the events, you'll see people wearing YMG uniform, wearing Wesley Guild uniform, wearing Young Women's Mañana uniform, everything in the space. So this started bringing a lot of conflict, because now those who are not MethSoc members started then saying these kids are confused. I started saying these kids are confused. And that created then conflicts with our siblings as well, which is the Wesley Guild. You know, because now we are, 1 minute we are an organization in the MCYU, because throughout the years, remember that the whole timeline that I gave you, that timeline, as it moves, we then got into the MCYU as well, or MYU at that time. So now they're an organization, but at the same time, they're a society. Now, another challenge is that structure thing that I spoke about. Because when they become an organization, they have their branch executive, who also starts acting like a society leadership, society stewards. At the same time, they are an executive of an organization. And then from there, you have your regional structure that takes decisions, right, about MethSoc. And this regional structure consists of more than one synod. And so this regional structure makes decisions and can choose whether to go to youth synod or not. When it wants to be naughty, it can ignore youth synod and go straight to their connectional executive, a connectional conference. Even if it doesn't get naughty and goes to the youth synod and accounts to the youth synod executive, at the same time, it's still accounting to its own connectional structure and takes decision at connectional level as well. So this created more tension with the other organizations and people that are outside of MethSoc. And it created confusion for people outside of MethSoc. And I'm emphasizing this. The confusion was with people outside of MethSoc, not MethSoc members, because they were happy with how they are and still are. So now this created a situation where around issues of accountability, because 1 minute you're saying they account to youth synod, to synod executive, at the same time they account to their own connectional executive, and they have a connectional conference and all connectional meetings. Synod has council meetings, they have their own regional council meetings. Now, out of all of this, conflicts began and they started growing to a point where, because MethSoc for a number of years, for a lot of years, had existed on its own on the side and started forming connectional structures before it even became part of the church, or part of the church, before it even got accepted, it had developed its own ways of working. And now when it got into the space, or when it got accepted and started being pushed into the MCYU, there were more conflicts. And it resulted in a situation where, in many cases, whether it be circuits, synod, regions, they would get excluded because abantwana badlala icawa, abantwana are confused. They started being excluded. You would find situations where in some synods, their branches would not get synod invitations for them to go to synod. Same applies with their regions. They would not be accounting anywhere. And then a toxic relationship started, where now MethSoc members, when they need something, they would contact MCYU every now and then, which would be hardly. And then MCYU, when it wants money and affiliations, it would contact MethSoc. Same applies to circuit MCYU executives. That started happening a lot. And then on the other side, the circuit wants money from MethSoc members with Ukhona and all other expectations. And on the side, MethSoc members are saying we do not have money. Now, because MethSoc also accounts to the university and the SRC, MethSoc then would get funding from the university. In a lot of universities, they would get some form of funding, which then meant that MethSoc did not basically need the church. So when MethSoc started realizing that they're being excluded, they said, oh, well, we're used to surviving on our own. And they would form their own events. Hence, then you'd start finding a situation. It happened a lot, especially in the recent years, where a synod would sit a youth synod, and then MethSoc on the other side would have a regional event, same weekend. And MethSoc would not feel any loyalty or whatsoever because they felt that they were being used, or they felt that they were being undermined. And another thing that started happening is that when they come into youth spaces, the Wesley Guild members would then start treating them like kids. I think my little sister likes saying to me when we have arguments and I try bullying her on something, she would say, remember, you are my brother and not my parent. So the same thing happened when MethSoc mingles with young people. They would start now having a situation where they're being treated as a stepchild. And now people that are not MethSoc members and don't understand MethSoc would start wanting to dictate what MethSoc should do and how MethSoc should behave. And now some of these things that were being told were correct. But remember, any child that grows up on their own, when an elder person comes to tell them what to do, they will not listen because they've had their own ways of surviving and they move with that. And the same thing happened with MethSoc. Because MethSoc had support from the university and would mobilize themselves, they started learning ways of surviving outside of the church. Because now you'd find situations where if they don't have funding, for example, in some regions, they started realizing that universities support outreach programs. So when we have our own programs, regional programs, let us have outreach as part of that. So that when our members are struggling with money, we can communicate with the university and say, can't we get assistance? Because universities would have what they call society officers. So they'd contact their society officers and say, we are going to an outreach. We have what's needed for the outreach. However, we need assistance with getting there. And then they would start getting assisted. They would start having, asking for donations on campus and having all sorts of fundraisers to get their members to the events. So this created a situation where they became more and more independent, which then fueled the conflicts as well. Because then there would be, for those who are outside, they would perceive this arrogance with MethSoc members. And sometimes it was there, you know. And then, and so this grew. And mainly it is because, and that's why I appreciated this. It was mainly because the conflicts were mainly because there wasn't an understanding of what MethSoc is. There were misunderstandings, and those who are not MethSoc members would say MethSoc should behave in this manner, forgetting that a university is complex. It has its own needs. And so then MethSoc needs to adapt. And in the university space, MethSoc was this very fluid space, right? It became this very fluid space because if, for example, there is exams, MethSoc would arrange its services and any other program that it has accordingly, so that it doesn't interfere with people's studies. If there's a period where it's submission period and things are hectic in some departments, MethSoc executive would start arranging all of its programs accordingly, which then resulted in it being this fluid space and MethSoc members wanting to stay in that space. Because some circles started saying, if we have these conflicts, how about we then just say, MethSoc, come and attend in a society that's close to you. Because there are some universities that are right close to traditional societies, like in Cape Town, right? Like in Cape Town, like in East London, where they would have that. However, because the MethSoc space was so fluid, MethSoc members would prefer staying in their bubbles or staying there in the university space. Because when it's time for exams, the church, the society, the local society will not change how it's doing its things. However, the university space, when a local preacher comes in, the executive will tell the preacher, we are now approaching submissions and it's hectic in the university. So please try and make sure that you do it in a way that will not be too long. You try and do in a way that will not be too long. The whole service, try and maneuver around this because students need to go back to study. Or sometimes the branch would decide, would really notice the calendar and they would say, okay, it's quite hectic for the students. For the next couple of Sundays, we will not have services. Another challenge that they started having, because they're weird, because they're told that they don't know ikawa, bahlala ikawa and all of that, preachers started missing their plans. They wouldn't go to the society. And so then MethSoc would then needed then to start finding its own ways of existing. And this complicated things even more. For example, you would find that preachers would not take their plans, ministers would not take their plans when they have to go to the university space, due to the fact that sometimes the numbers are few, and that would be the case when it's exams or when it's submissions. When the schedule is hectic, students won't pitch. Or when they come, if you are too long, they will walk out. Some ministers felt intimidated by the university space, and I'm not exaggerating. I've been to a quarterly meeting, a preacher's meeting, and a preacher said it, where they would feel intimidated by the space, and then they would not. Some would just undermine it. It's just kids in university, it's fine, even if I don't go. This created a situation where then MethSoc started noticing those who have the gift of preaching amongst them. And so those individuals would start idling. And those who had gone to the church before the church to be preachers on trial, they would start idling. So whenever there isn't a preacher, MethSoc members would take that plan and take it as time for pracs. And this became worse in the universities that have theology in their courses. Because now what would happen is that when a preacher doesn't show up, the students that are studying theology, we know them in our branches, would then say, get ready. This also started happening in a lot of universities, actually. And then you started finding some universities would have pre-Easter services. Some branches would start partnering with their theology departments and have a pre-Easter service. And this started creating more independence within the student society because they felt that they can sustain themselves to a certain extent. And then the only thing that basically now they couldn't do was get communion or offer communion amongst themselves because there's no minister. So that's another thing that started causing some of these problems. Now, the other thing amongst all of this that would happen in all of these challenges now is that MethSoc members they started having a bit of arrogance because they are independent. They can do their things on their own. They started having a bit of independence where they can tell a minister who wants to bully them that, Mfundis, stay where you are, it's fine. That's why you found now, that's why actually you found one conference where one coordinator was told to actually leave the conference and get another minister to actually come in. So it started being this arrogance, this confidence and this arrogance amongst the MethSoc members because they had gotten so used to being on their own. And it created that conflict constantly. Now, this meant that there would be problems around, for example, especially around young people, around integrating and working together in some synods and some circuits. This started forming a lot of problems, and MethSoc started being known as those who are arrogant. But now, as much as MethSoc had its own space and its own bubble, it would also start fighting for it to be included. But while it is not included, it would create its own circle on the side and its own center on the side. So there was constantly that thing, and it still exists even now, where you find there are problems in some synods, and MethSoc finds its own way of doing things. And now that creates a bigger problem, because as it finds its own ways of doing things, sometimes those ways are not really in line with how the church conducts itself. So there would be those problems. And that all of these problems that I've mentioned with the Wesley Guild and other organizations created a problem in the MCYU. A problem that got to a point where MethSoc members started saying, we want to go back to how we were. We want to exit MethSoc. We want to exit the MCYU. Where they started saying, it's fine. We want to go back to who we were, which is existing outside of this space. Also because not all of our members are youth. And this space caters for youth. And our members, we have people that are older than 35 that are not youth. And also because of how we are, how our structure is, how structures are, and also how we are a hybrid, we don't necessarily fit well. Especially then when the issue of chaplaincy started. The conversation of chaplaincy had started a number of years, a while back. However, it got silent a bit when there were ministers who were appointed to preside over MethSoc in the late 90s, when they started being included in the church more. They started getting ministers who would preside over MethSoc. And so the conversation about chaplaincy in MethSoc started being silent a bit. And then it came up again around the stage or around the phase of Fees Must Fall, where it started coming up again and the voice becoming louder, that as much as we have ministers that preside over us, this kind of context needs a person who is fully present in this space to minister to these people in this space. Because a minister who just presides over MethSoc will not necessarily have time for MethSoc and time for the members there. And so the conversation started and the church brought in chaplains. However, that also was a problem because the conversation came from MethSoc. However, the church implemented it without MethSoc. And it created problems. That's why now you find that some of the universities that had chaplains no longer have chaplains. Because MethSoc went back again and said, we had asked for these people, however, the implementation is wrong. Let's go back to the drawing board. And so currently MethSoc is in the conversations, is having conversations with the management of the church, looking at how can we best implement the whole program of chaplaincy within MethSoc. This then makes MethSoc even more complicated, especially for those who are outside of MethSoc. And one of the reasons why MethSoc continues to then say, let us have another, let us exit MCYU and exist on our own on the side. Because we are this complex space and we don't necessarily fit into this whole thing of MCYU. So MethSoc is now currently in those conversations. where they are discussing um, 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 where they're discussing the issue of chaplaincy, looking at funding models, looking at the other connections in other countries that have the chaplaincy program. Because the Methodist Student Society is not just in South Africa. There are other countries that also have it. The United Methodist Church also has MethSoc, but they have their own names, not necessarily MethSoc, but they have this program, this organization in the university space as well. Now, a bit on the work of MethSoc and some of our mission work. I had mentioned that we mainly push academic support and the holistic development of a student, right? And so some of the programs that you'd find MethSoc having, for example, in their outreach programs, they'd start having community career expos where they take the information that is in the universities and take it to the kids or the learners that are in disadvantaged backgrounds, so that they can actually get access into this space that is not as accessible as it should be, that is not as accessible as it should be. So now MethSoc is doing that kind of work. And so basically that's what MethSoc is. I tried to track the history of it. I tried to cover how dynamic it is, how fluid it is, and what some of the things that cause these problems within the society, the Methodist Student Society, and also in relation with the church as well and the other organizations. That is basically what MethSoc is, and I also tried to speak on where MethSoc currently is. Now, where MethSoc currently is. So yeah, those are the challenges. Anyone who has questions, please throw them in. And also just want to emphasize the fact that as much as I started in 1996, the whole journey, MethSoc existed way before that. There are some branches. That's why I said we are currently having conversations looking at the timelines, tracking some of these branches and some of these universities, because there are universities, for example, that we've actually been existing for 40 years. So, and there are some ministers who say I was with MethSoc members, journeying with them longer than 20 years. So we are currently tracking that. So that's where I've tried to cover also where MethSoc is, where MethSoc seeks to go. That's one thing that I have not covered. MethSoc is currently working on forming MethSoc in TVET colleges as well. It's currently working on that. It's been a conversation that's been going on for a number of years now, but MethSoc is currently moving into that now, where they're trying to emphasize or trying to make it more urgent. Trying to also revive MethSoc in some of our neighboring countries within the connection. Because throughout the years, some of because of the dynamics in those countries, for example, your Lesotho, some of the challenges there, you find that MethSoc is slowly dying out. In Swatini, it's still there, it's growing. So now we're trying to revive and trying to grow that. MethSoc is also currently working on linking up with the other countries that have MethSoc, like in the United Kingdom and the United States, where we're currently linking up, so that we see how we can work together. Now I'm going to try and look for the questions and then see what's there and respond to the question. But I'm noticing that a lot of the things there are just comments, and some of our alumni thinking back on their MethSoc days. Let me try checking this side. Okay. Goes with representation. Kamva, Khini goes with representation of MethSoc at the CYC. Obviously, the majority represented early. represented entity will vote with what fits them. Okay, let me go to that one. What Tukamva just spoke about is one of the challenges that I actually didn't mention. One of the things that caused some of the conflicts with MethSoc in MCYU is that it would get to different meetings like your youth synods and connectional conferences, and there would be the minority there. And so when they push whatever agenda that they want to push, basically they would lose out because they would be outvoted by everyone else that is there. And so there was also the issue of representation, where other entities in the MCYU would get, let's say, 3 seats, or they would be asked for 3 delegates to go to CYC. However, MethSoc would not be asked for delegates, or MethSoc would just be asked to give 1 person, sometimes even last minute. So you started finding that. You'd find that the synod executive would have all the other entities, but not MethSoc. In some synods, you'd find that they'll be there, but in some, they would not be represented. So those were some of the challenges, or those are some of the current challenges that MethSoc has. Another question, why is there no MethSoc branches in TVET colleges? I think I already covered this one. We are currently working on that. MethSoc is currently working on that. Sometimes it's also the nature of the TVET colleges. For example, here in Makanda, there's a TVET college. However, it doesn't really have societies. And the TVET colleges, well, one of the problems is that it doesn't have any residences. It doesn't have basically a what you'd call in a university context, a university culture, and the students, as much as the university is there or the college is in one area, but they're scattered out across the entire town. So on Sundays, they go to fellowship at the different societies. So in Grahamstown or in Makanda, they would go to your Shore Society, Amaqonokwebeni, and all of that. They would go to those spaces there. They'd go to those societies. So it becomes difficult then to say, let us form a society in your TVET college. So in some of the areas some of the TVET colleges, that has been one of the problems. Galoko Akire, it's 5 killed, 3 farms. Oh yeah, someone is just emphasizing the issue of representation where, how are you as the connectional executive trying to revive regions? How difficult or easy is it to maintain activities of the regions? Okay. With the regions, we've been trying, when we got into the executive, as the current connectional structure, when we got in some of the regions, namely the Western Cape region and the Free State region. So what we did there is we started linking up with the alumni because they form a very important role. They play a very important role. We communicated with them, we communicated with the branches and said, let us have conversations and understanding what the problems are. And then once we understood the problems, we said, let us now journey together and work towards a conference and getting an executive. In the Western Cape context, what we did was we worked with the branches there, but also the MCYU executive. And so the MCYU executive, we worked with them as the connectional executive in trying to get the members to meet and form their executives, or an interim structure. They moved from an interim structure, they got to a conference, and then from the conference, they elected their own executive. So that's what we've been doing basically to try and revive. We've been communicating with branches where, in cases where that's needed, and then would communicate with the synod as well in cases where it's needed. It's been a bit difficult, or rather when we started it was a bit difficult because as MethSoc, we also had our own challenges where the term before our term, where there was a lot of problems there, within the executive. And so again, MethSoc members and regions got used to working in isolation. And so when then a connectional structure a functional connectional structure came in, it was a bit of a challenge to get them back in, because now again, they got used to working on their own and being themselves. Can someone, okay, no. Okay. I'm trying to find questions. Okay, I've read this one. Okay, let me do this to make my life a bit easy. Okay. How is MethSoc's relationship with the alumni? Currently, it is a bit shaky. Now, currently, basically, it's dependent on the branches. How much the branches are in touch with their alumni. Because one of the things that happened is it was 2017, if I'm not mistaken. I could be mistaken. I think it was 2017 when MethSoc removed the concept of, or the body, your convocation from its constitution. So then basically what started happening is it would just be dependent on a branch linking up, or that executive knowing some of its alumni and having relationships with it. And that was just that. So now we are currently trying to revive that. Starting last year, we've been working on that. COVID slowed us down. But what now we're working on is re-establishing the convocation and reworking some of its structures, or some of its structures, basically, along with the alumni. So now we are currently in the process of getting the database for your alumni in the branches, where we are having conversations with the branches, asking them to start creating WhatsApp groups with their alumni, trying to get as many alumni as possible, because in order for us to reestablish the convocation, we would need to do it with the alumni so that it becomes a success and doesn't die out, or it doesn't become silent again. Because in most spaces, in most regions, the alumni are very silent. So that's where we are currently with the alumni. All these. Okay. Not really a question, just food for thought. Blessing the comments, engagements, and questions. All these come from people who are familiar or are not part of MethSoc. Do we really think that this toxic relationship will end? Do we have hope that okay. Finally be seen. Okay, Kamva, with your concern there. I don't like announcing things prematurely, but we are currently in the conversation of exiting the MCYU. We were going to have different conversations that we were going to facilitate from our conference. We started at the Executive Assembly, and then we said regions need to go back to their branches and have these conversations, because we will meet again at conference and have the conversations. So we were supposed to meet again at conference to have the conversation again and start looking at how we will exist outside of the MCYU. And then again, we were supposed to then also, this was going to be also on the program or on the agenda of CYC, this year. It was also going to be on the agenda of CYC this year, where we were going to facilitate a conversation. So we were going to do things differently from what happened in Cape Town, where in the CYC in Cape Town, a motion just came in, and then people were not interested in listening to the reasoning around the exit and just voted that it's not going to happen. So this time, it was going to be an item on the agenda where we were going to have a conversation around the exit of MethSsoc. So that conversation was moving with the one of chaplaincy as well. Is it allowed for an individual who's not a MethSsoc member to become a chairperson of a branch? It used to be the case where MethSsoc those who are not Methodists would be a chairperson of a branch. However, MethSsoc then took a decision that no, let us try as much as possible to avoid that because of issues of accountability. This was not just branch, region, connectionally as well, when MethSsoc took that resolution. And then in special cases where the state of the branch is really shaky, or whatever the circumstances, the branch would then decide that, you know what, let us actually elect. And they would have a conversation and say, you know what, we're not supposed to be doing this way, but we are forced. We've seen that in some branches where they would have a chairperson who is not a Methodist, but it would be in conversation, and they would also have had a conversation with the minister who would be chairing that AGM as well. And then they would reach that decision and find ways as to how are we going to ensure that we can hold this person accountable. But however, with region, it's not we don't compromise it at all. With region and connectional level, it's only Methodist members, people who are confirmed Methodists, that lead in MethSsoc. Okay, I'm just gonna look for a few more comments, and then we're going to finish. Okay. Okay, I see with some questions, there are already comments and responding to them, where people are answering each other there. Is it allowed for an individual who's not a Methodist to become... Okay, I've already responded to that. How I wish I was synod rep ebe mamele. Yeah, that's another problem that we have with MethSsoc around the issues of synod reps. Sometimes we'd find a situation where MethSsoc sends a person to be a rep qui synod executive. However, because of the pressures there, they end up forgetting why they're there. And they start neglecting the needs of MethSsoc and ensuring that MethSsoc is represented there. And they stop pushing the mandate of MethSsoc. So that's another problem that we tend to encounter. Another one around the issue of reps and synods is that you would find, and this has happened in some synods, where the guilders who are in the executive would dictate as to who will be the synod rep amongst MethSsoc members. And sometimes a MethSsoc member would not do the work that is required. And MethSsoc members would feel that this rep is no longer there for us. Therefore, they should exit and we get someone else into that space. And so when they come to Youth Synod wanting to do that, the executive would dictate and say that will not happen. And so you'd find that in some synods, you'd find, because of that, a person who is there as a MethSoc rep but is no longer a student of MethSoc, because the executive feels this person will not exit. So those are some of the challenges that are around the issue of reps. I'm just responding to the person that had brought that up. Okay. Question, why is it there no MethSoc? Okay, I've already responded to that one. Oh yeah, that's another comment. Sishumaila strongly Futi and the people left their circuits to MethSoc. That's another problem that also happened, where when MethSoc became more and more independent, you'd find it hosting events and inviting different societies in the circuit. And so now some young people would start leaving the societies in a way and start fellowshipping more with MethSoc and going to the universities, traveling to the universities to go and fellowship there. Can someone refresh my mind? In 2000, MethSoc exited the MCY. Okay. Point exactly. The problem with MethSoc within the church is that when resolutions are made in conference, MCYU makes decisions. Okay, let's read this. Okay, that one is just a comment and not a question. Okay, I'm struggling to locate or to see more questions. Okay, it seems like it's mainly comments. Yeah, it seems like most of the comments here are just comments, people having conversations, some thinking back on their MethSoc days. Okay, I think I'm going to finish. I think I'm going just to give closing remarks because I am not seeing questions. Someone is saying Guninin posted a question. Okay. The problem is that some people comment more than once, and then they also have conversations. Okay, I think I've responded to the questions. If I missed your question, I truly apologize. Because even the person that was looking for questions, because I had asked someone to also help me with spotting questions, and I'm not seeing them. They are also just mainly sending me comments and not really questions. So as I wrap up, so with all of those challenges and everything, one thing I must say though is that they have molded us as MethSoc members. All of those challenges have helped us grow as leaders, because another trend that we noticed is, as much as there was all of this exclusion and these pressures and these conflicts, when MethSoc members exit, they started becoming leaders in circuits and synods, where they would lead in the Wesley Guild, where they would lead in the MCYU at second level or at synod level. So there is basically a greener side, or there is great things that came out of the challenges that we experienced and being pushed to the peripheries, because some of us even grew, with confidence. We grew in preaching even, because when a preacher does not show up, we would step up, and so whenever there was a vacancy, MethSoc members would emerge, and you start to see now that a lot of them are leading in different spaces. And even there in those spaces, they would say that I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for MethSoc, which is a good thing. So that is what MethSoc is. I hope that this helped a lot. And I really, really, really hope that, I really hope and pray that this would help in reducing some of the conflicts in our synods that are a result of there not being the understanding. I hope this would reduce the conflicts that MethSoc branches would have with ministers, because of ministers wanting to impose their own ways on MethSoc and not wanting to understand MethSoc. So I would like to say that let us try and understand one another, because there's a lot that MethSoc has to offer. There's a lot besides the venues, because in some synods, MethSoc is used for venues, the university venues, because when they enter through MethSoc, they won't pay to book those venues and all of that. But besides those things, there's a lot that MethSoc has to offer. And I really hope and pray that this conversation would help in bringing us closer to each other. And with that being said, I'd like to thank the admins for inviting me to this platform. I'd like to thank the admins for providing this platform. Thank you very much. God bless you in abundance. And yeah, goodbye everyone. MethSoc members, do not sorry, I'm reading now a comment there. MethSoc members, do not forget to bring about change. Let us show ourselves. Thank you.